So in this demo, we are going to make a simple SMS app where you can text a message to a phone number, and that message will then post to your server on Turbo, where on your Turbo project you can render those messages on a regular web UI. Okay? So first thing you need to do is make sure you have the right tools installed. So sudo npm gulp. Well, I'm not going to do this because I already know that I have it, but if you're watching and you don't know if you have these tools, just make these installations. Otherwise, your project won't run. And then, last but not least, install the Turbo CLI. And as of the date of this demo, the most updated version is 0.15.7. So make sure you are running that or higher, and you should be good to go. So the CLI gives you basically a liaison to your Turbo environment where you can deploy projects. It's pretty much as simple as that. So when you want to deploy your project, you use the CLI to send your source code up to your deployment environment. We'll do that real quick right now, just so you can see kind of how everything works, right? We'll do a very quick deployment so you can just see how the whole thing operates. So what I'm going to do next is log in. I'm going to create a new app called text board, as in like a text bulletin board, and then we'll just call this SMS Demo. So what we need here is the app ID, right? This is how we identify, we connect our local source to our Turbo environment so we can do a quick deploy. So we're going to do that right now, just so you can see how the deployment works. All right, so here is the app ID. So once you have that copied, head over to your desktop and let's do a new project called text demo, which creates your source files over here and then CD into it. And then this is a regular Node Express application. It's pretty much a very, very basic Node Express app. So like any other Node Express app, just run the npm install and install all the packages and dependencies. Pretty standard, excuse me, standard Node Express sort of experience. Okay? And then once that's done, you want to run the dev server just to make sure everything works. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? So run the dev server. Which runs it on localhost 3000, and you should see a very simple Turbo scaffold. All right, very simple Turbo application, right? And real quick, just to make sure the entire environment works, we want to connect it to the app by doing Turbo app and then paste in your app ID. This will connect your local source code to your environment, so you have a connection from your project to your development environment, so you do that. And then Turbo deploy. And this will send your project to the Turbo hosting environment, the staging environment, which is free. So it gives you a free staging URL so that you can do all your testing and whatnot. So the deployment is happening right now. And then now that's done, we can grab this URL right here and go to the staging environment. And we just want to make sure it works, which it does, which means everything worked. We can now proceed with confidence that the environment works on the live versus local. Make sense? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through our source code architecture just so you get a good idea of how this project is organized. So like I said a minute ago, it is a Node Express application. Literally, this is a Node Express application. It's not a facsimile. It is Node Express. That changes when you deploy, but right now it's Node Express. So when you go on app.js, which is your conventional Node Express entry point, you'll see a very simple Node Express setup with a couple basic routes, and that's it, right? It's a Node Express app. In this case, in the Turbo scaffold, it's a little bit more opinionated than a very generic Node Express app. It installs the Mustache templating engine by default. It uses the public directory as your static asset directory. And that's basically it. So it imposes a couple of defaults that are conventional anyway, like the Mustache templating engine. So if you look at the views directory, you'll see the mustache templating engine. Oh, one more thing is the partials, which I'll get to later. So here is the index file that we were just looking at. Okay, with some very, very small templating here and there, like this guy right here, and that's a partial right there. Okay, I'll explain that later, but just understand that this is where your code renders. Right? This is where it sort of shows up, right? So one thing I'm going to do is create an API route. So if you, obviously everyone knows Instagram, right? So if you go on Instagram and click any Instagram like handle that you know off the top of your head and append it with the word media, you will see a bunch of, oh, they took it down. Oh wait, no, hold on. Oh, they took it down. Interesting. Good to know. All right. That used to be an API endpoint, so it looks like they changed that. So I'm going to create an API endpoint right now. Let's see, what were we going to do? So we're going to send a text message. So let's do this. I'm going to create a new route whose responsibility will be to receive text messages. Make sense? So we want to create a route right now. So cd routes. And then I'm going to create a new route called SMS just because that's a pretty good intuitive name, right? So here it is right here, the SMS route. I'm going to copy and paste one of the previous routes just to give me some quick content. And I'm going to remove all the current endpoints. Okay? So this is a very empty route. Just does nothing. And I'm going to have this guy return some basic JSON so that I can make sure that it works, right? So here, it's just going to say success, and then data, and then this is the SMS route, right? Very, very simple. So all I'm doing here is making sure the route works. That's all I'm doing. Just make sure it works, right? So this is a GET request. So I need to connect the route in my app.js now, just like any other Express project. So again, this is literally an Express project. So inside of an Express project, we have to go here, and we have to hook up that route, right? So here I'm importing it, and then here I'm hooking it up, right? So now here, I now created a path on line 15, which will serve that route. Make sense? So the route over here has one endpoint, which is the based endpoint, which is going to render that JSON unless I made a mistake, right? So if I go back to my dev server, now this is staging, right? So it's not going to work here. So we go back to our local host, and we do / the route path, which is SMS, right? / SMS. And here it is, right? That's the JSON that I defined for that route. Do you see that? Do you see the correspondence there? So that's basic routing. That's routing in Express, Node Express. This is how it works in a Node Express application. Okay. So now that we have that working, we're confident that our route is connected. This route will receive text messages from Twilio. Right? Twilio sends requests to whatever server you hook up. It's called a webhook through a post request, as opposed to a get request. Okay, this is a get request. So we have to go back to our handler here and create another endpoint. Post, exactly. And this will receive texts from Twilio. Right? That's the post handler. Make sense? So now we have to prepare this route to do exactly that, receive text messages from Twilio. So a post request, if you're familiar with HTTP protocols, sends data inside of what's called the body parameter, the body tag. So here, let's call it body rec. This is the data from Twilio, right? And the Twilio API returns the messages in the body inside certain keys. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the documentation. I'm just going to tell you what some of those keys are. So the message comes in the body key. Twilio has a weird convention of capitalizing their keys. It's kind of a strange convention that they maintain, right? And there's also the from key, which is the phone number. There's a handful of other keys, that don't matter. Right now, we're just going to use this. Okay. So Twilio determines these keys right here, body and from. Okay. We'll want to do some basic error handling to make sure that if these keys don't exist, we don't do anything to the database, right? Otherwise, we're going to inject corrupt data. We don't want that to happen. So right now, what we're going to do is check if the message exists, and if it doesn't, right, all we're going to do is send back an error confirmation. We're not going to do anything on the back end. We're not going to, mess up our database schemas or anything like that, right? So here, we're just sending back an error message, and that's it. Okay.
Do you have to return our response there?
Nope. So here, same thing. If there's no from phone number, just pretend like it doesn't, like it's a corrupt message. Like I don't know how that would happen, but in case it does, just ignore it. Just nothing, right? So from. Okay, so very, very sort of simple validation. You don't really have to do this, but this is good practice. Like this would be considered like best architecture. Okay, so now what we want to do next is we want to grab the, let's call it a message, SMS. Let's call it SMS. Twilio messages have a lot of things, but we care about the actual message and the phone number, right? That's all we really care about. So we're going to grab that data and we're going to call it from, and then message. And now we have a very simple SMS like data object, which we can push to the database. That could be Postgres, Mongo, Redis, or Turbo. Obviously, we want to use Turbo, right? So right now, since this is a Turbo scaffold, it gives us the Turbo liaison right here on line 2. Okay? So that's our database reference right there. So we can just grab that SDK and create SMS, pass in the SMS, and then this returns what's called a promise. Does anyone here not know what promises are?
Returns a what?
A promise. So
oh, yeah.
A promise is basically another way of doing completion handlers. It's just a more intuitive way, a sequential way of handling completion handlers. Okay. So all Turbo functions return a promise. So here, the catch means something went wrong, so you just return an error. And then the promise completion is right here, right? So once you get to that part of the completion, the data has been persisted. It is now in your database, quote unquote, okay? So here, we can now return a success confirmation, finally, right? So success. Frankly, it doesn't really matter because this goes back to Twilio anyway, so it's not like Twilio cares, but it's just good practice. Make sense? So now, what I'm going to do...
Wait, before you go, the Turbo create, what is it going into, like a MongoDB?
I'm going to show you in a second.
Oh,
okay. That's like the next step, so I want to show you where it goes, right?
Okay.
So before I send this guy up to the staging environment, I'm just going to make sure I didn't make any stupid mistakes, because that's, if anything, that's what I would do, is make a stupid mistake. So rect body, message, null, confirmation, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to send this guy up to the staging environment now, right? So turbo deploy. And now there's going to be a post handler on our project, basically ready to receive text messages. Does that make sense? Assuming I didn't make any mistakes, which obviously is possible, but that's what we fundamentally just set up, is a post request handler that really anyone can send post requests to, but excuse me, in this case it's going to be Twilio. Okay, so let's hit this home page right here just to make sure nothing crashes. Okay. So everything's good to go, right? But now there's a post handler inside this project. So if I go to Twilio now, not Twitter, Twilio. Okay, and then I'm going to grab my phone number. Here's the number that we have on Twilio. Now, the way Twilio is set up is that you can hook up what's called a webhook, meaning every time it receives a text message, it'll send a web request to wherever you tell it to, right? That's called a webhook with the data that it sends, the payload. So our live endpoint is right here, right? That's the project that we just deployed, right? Who remembers the path, the SMS path that we set up? Slash, correct, exactly. So here's the webhook area, right? A message comes in, you send the webhook, and then you paste in your project with the path, and make sure it's a post. That's what it should be anyway, right? So then save that guy. Okay, now it's saved, and here is the phone number, right? So on my phone, oops.
Is that your personal mobile phone number?
No, that's the Twilio phone number, right? Remember, Twilio manages the phone number.
Oh, so you text them.
Correct.
They
right.
send the message.
You got it. So now I'm going to text that number right now. I'm going to text specifically that number with the text message SMS Demo. Okay, so everyone see me doing that right now, right? SMS Demo. So if I send that, it's sent. Now I don't get a response. It's a machine, right? So now on my Turbo backend, here's my Turbo dashboard, right? So if I go here, and here is the message, SMS. Just a few seconds ago, that is my phone number, and that is the message I just sent.
Nice.
Make sense? And that's it. That's a Twilio webhook, right? So now if you, Steve, why don't you send a message right now to that number, to this number. Don't tell me what it is, but please keep it rated PG. Let's grab a glass of water. So tell me what.
Another way to say it is the webhook is posting the text message into the database.
In addition to whatever other metadata that Twilio sends it. Now you decide as a programmer what metadata you want. But Twilio gives you a lot of stuff where I'm just using the core pieces of information. Obviously the phone number and like literally the text that's being sent. Okay. Now I'm going to do some more stuff after we quickly get through this test. So sent. So now if the message is sent successfully, I can reload my Turbo data store and I can see what Steve sent, right? Make sense? So now that's in our data store, right? This is in the Turbo data store of our project. The reason why it's working is because we connected the app ID to our source code. Otherwise this wouldn't be working. Make sense? So the Turbo project is now successfully processing data the way we want. That's good. So that's step one. You guys with me? So now let's do step two.
What's the data store?
That's the database. That's where we store all the data that we
No,
want.
what kind of database is it?
Oh, it's Mongo.
Okay.
Yes, that's why you can just make the schema whatever you want. Like that.
So you said SMS, that would create the table.
Well, it's not a table. It's Mongo. These are
Right.
records, right? So, but if it was a relational database, every time you make a change, you got to run a migration.
Yeah.
That's going to be a pain for everyone.
Yeah.
Just screw it. So
Exactly.
that's why I went this route. Now, that's what makes this so fast and so easy, right? So now we have. Oh, wrong project. Now we have our two SMS messages that were sent a second ago. So our data, our backend is now currently populating, right? Which it's working the way we want. Now, let's actually do something with it. Right? We don't want to just see this all the time. This isn't very exciting. Right? So let's get that data showing up here. Right? So now we go back to our project. And the index mustache is what's rendering on the default. Right? That's what we were saying a second ago. Right? Let's change that up and have it render messages that are currently in our backend using the mustache templating engine. So inside the index.js wrapped right here, this guy right here is the one that's servicing the home page. These are just a couple other examples I put in there for just for posterity kind of. So I'm going to get rid of these guys. And this is the only one that really matters, right? So in other words, at this juncture, in this route, we need to grab the data, right? That's where it's going to happen. So again, we have our turbo reference right here. It's right there because it's a turbo project, right? And now we want to grab the SMS messages, right? So we need to know how to do that. Now, obviously, I know how to do it because it's my SDK. I wrote this. But if you don't know how to do it, every turbo project comes with a documentation file right here, okay? So you can, sometimes I do forget the APIs of my own project because I wrote, this is like 7 projects combined into one. I just forget stuff. So I have to, this is actually more for my benefit than anything else. Like I just forget some of the APIs. So right now, I am going to use this method right there, fetch, right? That's the method we need to fetch data, right? So here, we're going to do turbo, fetch, and like I said, it always returns a promise. So we just do the standard promise sequence. There we go. Sometimes I have like a brain freeze and I just forget what I'm doing. So here, we're fetching SMS messages, right? And we have no particular preference as to which ones. So there's no query filter, which ones we pass in null. Just give me all of the messages, okay? And then this is going to crash. All right, better. Now the payload is here, error is here. Let's do some basic error handling. Now, for now, I'm going to just render JSON on success because before putting it inside the templating engine, really what I want to do is confirm that we're even getting the data. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of this template render right here. And right now, it's just going to render the data, assuming there is any data. Okay? So if I go back to my dev server now, localhost, look at that. You see that? That's the text messages that we just sent a few minutes ago. You see the text and the phone numbers and all that stuff?
And that's the entire JSON coming from Twilio?
No, Turbo. Twilio sent it to Turbo's backend. Turbo then put it inside the database because that's how we wrote the handler. And now we're getting it from Turbo.
Keys are coming from Twilio.
What keys?
I'm just curious, I'm looking at that data. It has like schema, site, timestamp ID.
This is from Turbo.
Okay.
The MongoDB database.
Okay.
Now,
but the keys in the Twilio message are listed right there. ID, timestamp, message from.
Oh, right. This is the schema. As you create a new record in your Mongo database, Turbo also returns to you what basically the keys are.
Oh.
I might remove that because people are confused by that.
Oh, okay.
So I might just remove it. It was more of a courtesy,
Yeah.
but I think people are like, I don't know what to do with that, so I'm just going to remove it. So it's not a big deal. It was something I put in there kind of as like a courtesy to the developers, but people are more confused by it than anything else, so just forget it. So here's the data. We've successfully retrieved the data, right? So actually now, to be really sure, if one of you guys can send another text message to this number, please. Anybody, I don't really care who. Just again keep it rated PG. Okay. This time I'm going to verify from here. Okay. So if I reload this, now I get more messages from the actual project. Okay, no longer on the Turbo dashboard. Right? You guys with me? That means it worked. Everything worked.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we're confident that we have the data that we need, now we can just do stuff with it. Now the hard part is done. Now we can render it, make it look pretty, make it look nice, do all that stuff. So what I'm going to do is grab this data. Right here, that is what we care about, right? The data. So here's where we want to render now. Now we want to render the index template, but we don't care about this text key. We don't care about that, right? We care about messages. And we're going to pass in the data as messages. Now the template has access to a new variable called messages, which consists of our Twilio text messages, which we can now render, right? So inside the index mustache, which currently shows this, let's get rid of all this nonsense, and let's render the messages right here, right? So yeah, now we're ahead of schedule, so I'm going to do some more cool stuff just because I feel like it. So if you want to catch a lot of cool stuff in a few minutes.
You know what the next question is, right?
What?
So how do you send text messages from Twilio, like to a phone?
Oh yeah, you just respond. You can just write a response in the. I'll explain later. Messages. So here's how you loop through an array in mustache templating. That's the beginning of the loop, the end of the loop. Right, just think of that as a loop. That's it. So pretty straightforward. The thing is the data is inside of an array. So you have to loop through the array, and for each one of these, we're going to create a list item element and message.
So
Right.
JSON is converted to objects.
Well, it's already an object.
Yeah.
It's an object. And then just, yeah.
JSON,
So-
right?
Right now we have our messages rendered from Twilio to our backend, now onto here. Right now, to be really sure, because don't forget we're on localhost, right? So if you want to be really sure, let's deploy this guy, because it doesn't matter if it doesn't work on live, right? That's the ultimate arbiter of does this work or not, right? So if it works on local but not on live, doesn't matter. The answer is it doesn't work. Right, so we have to go to live and see what happens. That's the ultimate programmer. Like when people report a bug, programmers are like, works on my computer. It's not doesn't matter. It's not good enough.
That doesn't fly.
All right. So that's live. So now it works. Right. So the entire environment works. Right. So far so good.
Can you go back to the code
Yep.
real quick?
Yep. Sure.
I think it was in either the SMS.js, I think is where you did
Yep. Sure.
the mapping for that.
Right here is where all the business logic happens.
Oh,
It'll be back in a second.
pretty good. So, is that
This code, I posted the code on the website too. So if you ever need to review the code, you can download all the code. I put all my contents are on my website. I don't hide anything. You can even take my API keys. I don't care. It's all just there.
Can you scroll down? I'm not seeing what I'm looking for.
Don't go anywhere, Steve. It's gonna get a lot better in a minute. I got a lot more planned after this. So.
Okay, cool. I'm not going anywhere.
I was curious about where the JSON object is coming from Twilio with the message
Correct.
data.
Yep.
Could you pull? Was that in index.js?
No, that's right here. Specifically, what you're referring to is these lines right here.
In the success, so those are handling the errors. The success is
Right here. This is the success block.
the turbo.create. So on line 45,
45. Yep.
where it has the data is the data.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just trying to see the connection between the information that Twilio has and then the messages that we ended up getting on the web page.
Yeah, so right here, this line 41, it takes the data from Twilio. So this data right here is from Twilio. For all intents and purposes, that's the Twilio data.
Yeah.
Now, we take that data, we package it into an object called SMS, and we send that package to Turbo right here. And Turbo then persists it to the Turbo database, which is a siloed database per your project. So when you create a project, you get a silo of the database in the Turbo architecture that belongs to you. And that goes to your silo.
So that data that's coming through on line 45
Mhm.
is all of the Twilio data?
Incorrect. No, that's
Is it
the
Turbo?
response from the Turbo. So when Turbo persists the
Line
data,
42.
yeah, just when Turbo persists the data, it sends back a confirmation of success or failure, as every good API should do that, right? And that's the success from Turbo saying, we grabbed your data, we stored it to the database, everything successfully worked, here's the response.
Okay.
And you made it a promise because Turbo Create could be asynchronous. I assume.
Well, it originally was asynchronous, but promises are where everything's going today. Like, if it's not a promise, you're still in 2016, which is ancient history. So it's all promises now. So it's kind of like that's why everything is ES6, right? Like, believe it or not, 18 months ago I did all this in ES5. Like, you got to keep up with all the changes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Did we set up the schema?
No, that's the Mongo versus SQL question he was asking. So I made it a Mongo backend so that you can just do stuff like this. So we don't have to define our schemas and run migrations all the time.
I'm just confused because when the I don't even know what it was. It happened so quickly. But there was the JSON object had a couple properties, and then one of them was data that had like its own. It was like inside of there was another object, I think.
Sure,
And it
if
had
you can point
specific
to,
fields
yeah, if you
that
can-
it was talking about. I was curious where those came from.
if you can tell me what part of the code you're referring to, I can give you a definitive answer on that.
I think it was when you just rendered the JSON onto the page.
Yeah, so that would be over
the
here.
test.
That would be over here, and this is what the test used to be when I just rendered the JSON. Correct.
And that had its own like structure to it. And I was
Yes.
curious where that came
From the Turbo backend.
Okay, from Turbo.
Correct. Otherwise, we'd be hitting the Twilio API, which we're not. So what's instructive to see here is that Twilio is cut out of this loop. Twilio effectively has nothing to do with this.
This is actually what I was looking for. We're on line 15 where we're saying messages
Mhm.
is data. That connection isn't exactly clear to me.
So I'm calling it messages because that's when you send a
Yeah.
SMS to the
You're just
backend.
giving it all the data, so how does it know to? How does it pick out specifically the text?
It's
from
just
the text
syntax.
message?
So here, it's just pure syntax. This is really message. What I could have done as well is just go with like that. And a lot of people would do it that way. It's just syntax is my point. Now I'm going with a more generic variable called data because it's sort of an all-purpose catch-all. Like it's just data.
So I guess it's really happening in the turbo.fetch SMS part. That's where it's telling it to go to SMS and fetch all of the messages.
That are currently in your database. Correct. And we populate the database by literally sending text messages to that phone number.
Okay.
Make sense? So
Yeah.
what we've done here is we've confirmed that that whole flow is successfully taking place, right? Which means now we can use that data to render it in whichever way we want to, which is what we just did a minute ago. So far, so good?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I think the Turbo is doing.
It's really right now we're using what's called the data store, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's just storing the data. That's it. It's just taking the data, just putting it right in there, and then here we're fetching the data. That's what we're doing with Turbo. That's where Turbo comes in, as well as the deployment environment. What we did not do is set up the entire database with the database connection, figure out how to manage that connection. We didn't do any of that stuff. That's part of what I'm trying to alleviate with the Turbo architecture. Is, do you see how fast I got this up and running? Right? I can't do it this quickly in the conventional architecture. AWS with Postgres, RDS, whatever they're calling it today, and hooking up all that architecture. Now that's what I do for a living. That's what people pay me to do, right? What I found is that I've been doing this for almost 6 years now. I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and it seems like it's not getting any faster. There's no better way, and I'm trying to create faster, better ways to get from idea to business logic without messing around with scalability, database administration, setting up the DNS and all that stuff. Like, it just works. So going into that, what about scalability? Like, is this a single instance on EC2? Like, if that's the case, then this is not very scalable. Excellent question. I'm glad you asked. It is not an instance on EC2. This entire architecture runs on serverless Lambda. There are literally no servers running this. It's a serverless Lambda function is running your entire website. Your Turbo website is one Lambda function with a series of sub-functions that it calls to render pages and whatnot. So why does that matter? Because Lambdas don't run on servers. It's serverless. So what that means is you can scale this infinitely. You can scale as much as you want, and there's no server consideration behind that. You don't have to set up an auto-scaling group, an elastic load balancer. You don't have to set all that stuff up. You don't have to set up rules for scaling up and down. These are all things I have to do with professionally. Right? And this is what I do normally. But since the advent of serverless, which is about 2 years old now, 2.5 years old, that whole paradigm can change. Because you can just deploy your entire website on serverless if you know how, which is pretty tricky, or you can use Turbo. And Turbo scale, because it's Lambda anyway, this is all just a Lambda environment. So Turbo scale is as infinite as Lambda's scale. It's just, to be honest, it's a proxy to Lambda. So the question then becomes, why can't I just deploy all this on Lambda? Well, you can. In fact, I encourage you to try that. Because what I want to get across is that if you deploy your project on Turbo, you are not stuck with Turbo. That's called vendor lock-in. So what that means is you can take your project down from Turbo, because it's just a Lambda function. You can take it down and redeploy it on your own Amazon Lambda. It'll be a pain for a couple hours, but then after you figure it out, you're good to go. Right? That's the vendor lock-in is completely alleviated in this environment because it's just Lambda functions. That's it. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to have some skill behind you to back it up. Like, you have to know how to hook up the API gateway, the SSL, all that stuff. And that's on you if you want to do that. And again, I encourage that. That's fine. But my point is, if you put it on Turbo, you're not stuck with Turbo. Okay, you can redeploy on AWS Lambda for your website. The reason I'm really pointing that out is because in my estimation, that's going to be the norm in about 5 years anyway. Is just taking your website, packaging it as a Lambda function, and putting it on Lambda. Why do I say that? because the cost benefits of Lambda are ginormous, are ridiculously low. And I don't really care, I'll just show you. So here, I'm running 3 servers to keep my infrastructure going. 3 EC2 instances that are called T2 micros, which are like the smaller kind, the cheaper kind. And every month that costs me about $65, $66, give or take.
So all your turbo stuff costs you like $56 a month.
Well, the EC2 instances,
Oh.
right? This is the current month. So this is already $24 from back. But the EC2 instance costs me like $65 a month, or give or take, right? But the actual Lambda invocations, nothing. Literally nothing. That's my Lambda bill for 13,000 requests.
Oh my God.
Right? Do you see that? So my EC2 bill per month, this is the current month, so this is going to double to 0, right? But my EC2 bill, or triple, whatever today's date is, times whatever. So this is, I'm at $24 already, or $21.20, $22, bless you, on EC2. You see that, Elastic Compute Cloud? That's $22 to run 3 servers across 10 days in November. So multiply that by 3, that's going to be $65, $66 when it's all said and done. That'll be 0, right? So this is so compelling from a cost standpoint. Other businesses are picking up on it right now. That's why serverless is not going anywhere, because these price comparisons are incontrovertible. Like, you can't dispute this. So the question becomes, how do I deploy my website on Lambda? Well, I've figured all that out. You just deploy on Turbo. It's done, right? Obviously, there's a markup. I'm not going to charge you 0. But there's obviously also plenty of margin between 0 and $65, right? So my markup might be $10 a month, $12 a month, something manageable, right? Pretty soon, these EC2 instances will be down to, I'm going to kill one soon, because I'm slowly porting over the entire Turbo backend over to Lambda myself. Because I'm thinking, like, why am I paying $65 a month? I can get this down to nothing, literally nothing, right? Which is the process that's underway.
How are you going to make any money on this?
Well, AWS processes billions of requests per hour. Like, it's not like they're fine. Like,
Yeah.
it's not. So, Matt, what was Eric saying about his CDN costs? It's like 10,000. Yeah. So like, just it's
Oh my
yeah.
God.
Yeah, just
Right.
outrageous amounts of money spent on this stuff.
All right. So that's just a quick overview of like why serverless is even a thing. Or like, why did I build Turbo? Why did I spend so much time building this? I spent a lot of time building this. Why? Because the cost benefits are indisputable, right? So now if I can pass it off to the consumer, then you can run a website with 10 million monthly requests for 60, 70 bucks, 80 bucks, which is not what it would normally cost, by the way. It would cost a lot more than that, right? So on EC2 or Heroku is a better comparison because Heroku is a direct sort of, not competitor, but it's a direct abstraction of EC2. So most beginners would go to Heroku first. Has anyone here used Heroku? Right. So most people would go to Heroku first, right? Because it's a very good experience. It's easy to use, easy to set up, easy to deploy. And that's all well and good. I can't argue with that. But at some point, it comes down to dollars and cents, right? If you're running 10 million monthly requests on Heroku, you are not paying 75 bucks. You're paying quite a bit more than that. Then the question is, can I get this stuff over to EC2 on AWS? And instead of paying 4,000, I'll pay 2,000, right? Like, or I can pay 75 bucks on Lambda. Your ultimate best move is to go to Lambda directly and just go lowest level, go right to Lambda. That's where you'll get the most savings. But like I said, it requires some professional skill, right? Like you have to know how to even do that, right? And again, I encourage you to learn it and figure it out. It's a good learning experience. But in the meantime, Turbo also does all that for you in addition to a lot more. Okay, so I'm going to show you what some of that stuff is right now. So here, here's what we have right now, right? It doesn't look very fancy, so let's change that. So I'm gonna grab a theme. These are current themes that Turbo supports right out of the box. So I'm going to use one of these themes.
So when you say it supports it, that means it's not built into Turbo?
It is. You'll see in a second what I mean. So All right, so that we installed that theme called Hyperspace. And now if I go to localhost 3000, it should look quite different, which it does. So now I have a new theme integrated into Turbo, right? Do I want to go with this one? Yeah, that's fine. All right. I don't know why it changed a little bit. Let me try a different one real quick. Turbo theme editorial. So I'm swapping themes. I didn't really plan on doing this, but it doesn't look the way I thought it would. So. All right. Oh, that's why. Okay, because I have it all the way zoomed up here. All right. So here's a different theme, but I'm going to go back to Hyperspace because that was my original plan. So Turbo just gives you themes out of the box. We're adding new themes every week, roughly once a week. So that's good to know. All right, back to Hyperspace. So now I'm going to get rid of this header, and I'm going to start from here. And these are going to be the messages. Okay? So here is now the index mustache with the Hyperspace theme integrated. Right? The HTML changed to the Hyperspace theme. So obviously, because it's different HTML. So we want to get rid of that header and start it right here, right from the messages from the top, right? And then we can put the actual phone number and the message, or the other way, message and phone number if you want. What I'm going to do instead is something a little bit different though, because that's not a very exciting UI. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I got a couple friends who like to text me URL links all the time, typically relating to fantasy sports. So like if one of my players gets injured, he'll send me a text saying Mike Evans is suspended or whatever. Like I get text messages of a link to like a Twitter article or like a New York Daily News or something like that a couple times a day, right? That's actually why I asked Matt to shut off the messages notification, because sometimes they're not very nice messages. So what I'm going to do is take those messages and process them into URL links that you can render here that'll show the actual preview of the URL. So if I go to Google News, you see how Google News is just linking to other articles, right? These are articles that are not on Google, correct?
Yeah.
But this data has to come from somewhere. You see that? This data has to, it's kind of sad, but this data has to come from somewhere. This is really a bad time to be showing stuff like this on public video. But the question is, how, right? Most websites, most content-driven websites have what's called metadata stored at the top of the page itself. It's called the head tag. It just stores some metadata, like what's the title, the image, the article. So for example, if I go to the sports section of New York Post, typical article that I would read to catch up on fantasy, right? If I go to the source, here you will see that there are tags, specific tags. You guys see that? That give you information about the article itself. Here they are, sorry. Okay, so right here, you see that? These are called meta tags. Okay, when you share a link on Facebook and it gives you a preview, that preview comes from here. Okay, and that the meta tags are title, URL, and image. Those are the ones we care about. And description. Title, URL, image, description. So we can grab those from the link and then inject it into our database and then render that instead. And that's what we're about to do. Does that make sense? So let's see that right now. So what I'm going to do is go back to my Turbo project, cd into the routes. I'm going to create a new route called tags. Right, and this guy's job will be to grab the meta tags from any given URL. Okay, so inside that route, I'm going to copy and paste the SMS route just to get some initial content, but I'm going to remove basically everything else that was originally there. And just like before, we're just going to start with that just to make sure it works, right? We got to make sure it's connected, right? So going back to our app.js, we're going to import the tags route. Let's run the dev server and make sure that that route is connected. Okay, home page and then tags. There we go. Okay, so it's connected. We're good to go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a URL into that route. So let's grab the one that we use as a demo, so the New York Post one. Okay. Now, first thing we want to do is grab the URL from the query. In other words, we have to pass in a URL parameter into the tags route, right? And if we don't, if by chance we forget, as always, we should return some sort of error just to make sure, right? So give it a quick, hey, you forgot the URL. Missing URL query parameter. Okay. Just to make sure we don't make any stupid mistakes. Now, if I go back to the tags route, we should see that error message, right? So that's good. Now we can grab the URL. What do we have to do next? We got to grab the HTML from that URL. Right? We need to grab the HTML so we can pick it apart. That's called parsing, right? Or scraping in this case. It's called scraping, right? So we're going to grab the URL using a module called superagent, which is simply an HTTP module that makes requests on our behalf. Okay? So this is an npm module. And while we're installing modules, we're also going to install another module called Cheerio, which will do HTML web scraping. So we can get into the HTML and pick out what we want, the meta tags, right? So that's Cheerio.
So what is superagent?
Just a request module. It makes requests to, I don't know how far you got in Angular, but it's the HTTP module in Angular. It makes GET requests. Well, any kind of request, but we want to use GET. So I did Angular for about 1.5 years professionally, so I'm pretty familiar with that too. So here, tags. So now here we have the URL. We're now going to request the HTML from the URL, right? So see, that's a superagent thing. So we have to import superagent. Oh no, this is not a promise. This is get query. Okay, we don't need any query params. Just pass in the URL and then the completion handler. Error response. If error, we just throw back an error message. So usual error handling. So here I'm just going to throw back the error itself because I wouldn't know what it would be anyway. So, and then here, this time I'm just going to send back literally the HTML. Right? So here if I do HTML equals response. So again, just like Node Express, this is a Node Express application, right? So this is an Express API called send, where we can just spit back the raw text, right? So now if I go here and I reload the tags endpoint, right? If I do that, I get the error saying you forgot the query parameter, right? That's what's supposed to happen. So let's grab the article we're testing with, this guy right here, right? And let's send that guy in as the URL. Forgot to remove the original response. Okay, so let's try it again. Now we're seeing the web page on our project. Look at the URL. You see that? It says localhost, not newyorkpost.com, right? So what are we doing? We're grabbing the article from New York Post, we're taking the HTML, and we're just sending it back on our website. Okay, this is how like a lot of spoofing is done, by the way. Like you can just sort of like fake websites this way and like get information, get people to sign up, stuff like that. So does that make sense? So now we've successfully confirmed that the HTML has been captured. That's good. So now we can basically pick it apart and grab the information we want, right? That's called scraping. We want to scrape the HTML now. So here is the HTML from the source. So we're going to scrape it using that Cheerio module that I imported, right? So Cheerio is kind of a strange API. Oh, I didn't import it yet, so 32. So Cheerio is kind of an unconventional sort of like API structure where you load the HTML into this $ like jQuery type reference, and then you can iterate through it in a jQuery basically like you would through jQuery. So what we want are these tags, right? That's what we're going for. Right, that's the information that gives us like the key snippets of data, right? So that is these are meta tags, right? So what we want to do is iterate through these meta tags. So okay, so now here on line 34, we've just grabbed every meta tag from the page, which might be like 20, it might be 1, it might be 2, whatever. We have them all now inside that array. So if meta all right, so let me explain this right now. So here we're grabbing the attributes from each tag. You see where it says property, content? You see that? Those are called attributes. Okay? If there are no attributes, this means forget it, just ignore it. Just proceed, continue. Just forget about it. Good? And then const. So now we're doing some very basic web scraping. From those attributes, we specifically want the property attribute because this one property attribute, you see that?
Yeah.
That tells us what property we have, right? But again, if it's null, it might not be there, so just ignore it. Just forget about it, right? However, if it's not null, now we want to see which property we have. We don't want all of them. We only want a certain few. Title, image, description, whatever. So
the ones that begin with OG, comma?
let's go even more fine-grained than that. Let's say if property equals literally OG title. We want that guy. We want that. So then let's set up a tags, just an empty JSON that's sort of on standby, right? I'm going to say tags title equals attributes content. Because inside the attributes, the content is really the payload. That's what we really want, right? we want to grab the content. You see that? Content. Trade the Yankees, Mets, Jeter should make this week. Like that's what we're really going for, right? So now, assuming I did this successfully, instead of just rendering all that HTML, because we don't really want that, let's see if we even have the tags. So look at that. We got that one piece of information we wanted, which means our parsing was successful, our scraping was accurate. Now we can grab more stuff. Good? So let's do that. So what do we want? Title, description, image, and I think that's it, right? All right, cool. Now we're in business. Now we really have what we want. Good? Based on the URL that was passed in. Right? Can you see where this is going? My friends just send me URL links. That's all they send me. Right? They don't send me a huge summary of the URL. They're just like, hey, check this out. They don't even say, hey, check this out. They just send me the link. Right?
You want to know what it is before you click on it.
Right. They don't even like correspond. They're just like, they just send me links. Like, hey, your guy got suspended, so have fun with that. Like that's essentially what they're saying, which is true. So what we can do now is send this link to our backend, right? Our SMS handler, parse the link, grab the metadata, put that into Turbo, and then render the content like a newsfeed. You with me?
Yeah.
So let's do that. So now here, we set up all this scraping as an endpoint, mostly just for testing. Or not mostly, completely just for testing. Really, we're not going to use it like this, right? That's not what we're going to use it for. So what we want to do is write a utility function who only does this, right? So let's do that right now. So I'm going to create a folder called utils, cd into that, create an index, and then create another one called scrape. Okay, so I have a utility folder now with scrape and index. This guy, the scrape utility function, will just do what we can just copy and paste the function over. That's it. So here, I'm going to import. You know what? Forget the index. That's over abstracting. So I'm just going to do scrape. Okay, module exports. And let's create a function called scrape. Which will take an HTML parameter, and that's it. Like you just give it the HTML, it'll just scrape out what you want. So inside the tags, we're going to need the Cheerio module. And then inside here, you see how the HTML begins here on line 34? Right? From there, the scrape utility function should take it from there. It should take over from that point. Right? So inside here, all of this belongs inside the scrape function. So like that. And we have Cheerio imported, so there's going to be no breakage there. Now, really, this function isn't very robust. It's only going to scrape meta tags, and that's it. So this isn't something I would use like long term, but this is better architecture. So grab this, and then we have our tags. Don't forget that. it goes through all the HTML, picks out what you need, and then return the tags. All right, why am I doing this? So I can just take all this and put it inside the Twilio handler rather than like copying and pasting all the code. Like I can just use one library in multiple places, right? So here, inside the tags route, I'm going to comment all this out, and then I'm going to do, I have to import that module, so const scrape. Route, so I need 2 on these. There we go. So here I imported the library I just wrote, that one function I just wrote it. I imported it right there, and scrape. Let's just call this tags, because scrape.scrape is kind of stupid. Let's call it tags. So going back here, we go var tags equals scrape.tags, and we pass in the HTML. And that's it, right? All that code was now moved into the scrape utility function, right? So again, it's kind of like, well, we already got it working. Why are we moving stuff around? Because we want to use it somewhere else, right? We don't want to copy and paste code everywhere. That's very poor form. You don't want to do that. So I'm cleaning it up right now. So here, the next thing I'm going to do is just make sure nothing broke, because that's always a high probability. So if I go back here, it still works. Good. Still in business. Nothing broke. So now, what we can do look at how much simpler this code just got, right? It's just one, I mean, we can even go as far as this. Just grab that response.txt and put it right there. And that's it. You see that? So now we can take that function right here on line 33 and just throw it over to our SMS handler and use that to scrape content. So let's grab our super agent, because we're going to need that to request the content. Right? And then here, this is where all the SMS functionality is taking place, right? That's where we're posting our data. So what we're going to do is the following. Before we create our SMS function in the Turbo database, we're going to check if it's a URL. If it's a URL, we do something else first. We scrape. If it's not, we just do what we normally do. You guys with me? So we need to import the scrape module. Don't forget that. Very easy to forget. Okay. Now we have our body, we have our from, SMS, and then we go ahead and post the message right away. That's too soon now. We're going to take this, comment it out for now. We're going to check the message. If message index of is greater than or just not equal to -1. This is a URL. That's a link, right? There are better ways to do this, but this is just a simple way to check if it's a link, right? This is like a quick and dirty check. That means this is a URL link, which means we should scrape that guy. So let's do that. So we can go back to our scrape URL. I'm sorry, our tags URL. We can run this super agent request right here. Now, for all intents and purposes, that message is the URL. So right now, we're just going to operate under the presumption that when you get a URL, that's all you get. Like if you get a URL and some comment after it within the same text message, that's going to mess us up. Well, that's an edge case we'll deal with later if I really care about this project. But this is just for demonstration, right? So here, we're going to take this guy. Let's do all this crap. Scrape it out, and then here we have our tags, right? See?
If you wanted to, you could have moved the super agent call into a utils class also. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna Like, I mean, it's the same difference really, because no matter what, you got to call the function.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, so now what we're going to do,
Save it.
yeah, real quick, I'm going to restore that guy because it's going to run if it's not a URL. We should leave that to run anyway. Now what we're going to do is create a different model for this because it's not really a text message anymore. It's now an article, a link. So we're going to create a link, var link. And the tags gives us a title, description, and an image, right? Really, like we can just insert that as the link. It's more or less the same. So here we can do turbo, create, link, tags. And these completion handlers are the same, so we can just throw those guys in. And we're going to ignore the message. Basically, if it's a link, we create a link and we ignore the message. If it's not, we create a message. It's mutually exclusive. It's one or the other. Obviously, we can make that change, but I don't want to get into all the nuances behind that. It's just one or the other. Okay? So, from a conceptual standpoint, do you guys see what we're doing here? Okay, we're grabbing the URL, we're parsing it out, we're just reusing that parse function, right? And then we're creating a new data type called link, because why not? And then we're just sending back our request or our fail, right? So now, if I deploy this guy, while that deployment is going up, I'm going to grab a link from my iPhone. Okay, so here I'm grabbing a link from my iPhone about a Jets game that's coming up. Okay, so here's the link I have. It's about the New York Jets. Okay, so I'm going to grab that. And then we want to send that to the phone number as is. Okay, we don't want to add any text or anything like that. So if I send that guy up, right, well, it went up, so let's see what happens. I mean, we have some error handling anyway. Like even if we do corrupt the text, it'll just go in as a message instead of a link. So hopefully, either way. So now the data store. Did not post, so. All right, well, the deployment is good because this is what I see now, right? And I did send a message. Yes, I did send the message successfully. So let's see what happens over here. Okay, let's see if a regular message works. Test. 8. Does anyone have an iPhone cable, by the way? Like, I'm pretty much out.
Yeah, I do.
Thanks. Okay, so this worked. You see that? That's the one I just sent. Okay, so something's wrong inside of our scraping block, right? Okay, not a big deal. Let's figure this out. So, thanks, Steve.
We'll use the restroom real quick.
Where can I put this? Right here.
Straight up.
Okay. So here, super agent. You guys see it? You guys see it? Wow, very rookie mistake. I put the message in the query, not the URL itself. All right, let's try it again. And I've done a lot of these demos, and like making bugs live used to really like phase me out, you know. But now it's just like
It's part of life.
I just expect it to happen. Like, how many bugs am I gonna make today? You know, like. But I remember one demo in particular, like I was just sweating buckets. This is like probably my third demo in my entire life, like 2 years ago. And I was just like, what if I don't find it? Like, I'm gonna lose all these people. And then I did find it after like 10 minutes of debugging. Okay, I'm gonna send the link right now, again. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. There it is. See that? With the image. Okay? So now we got some other data called link. In other words, now we can create basically like a regular news feed from this style of application. So if I go back to my index mustache, right here, instead of fetching SMS messages, let's fetch links. Link. Because I really want to use this as a de facto newsfeed. Because like people are sending me links every day anyhow. Just like put it on a newsfeed, right? So if I now that I have the links, right? I'm going to call that a links key instead. I can now iterate through that key and just render whatever articles I have. So here, inside the index mustache, you may notice that I picked this for a reason. You see the structure here? Image, title, description, link. You see that? So now all I got to do is iterate through that. And grab one of these guys. And here we have the image reference from the tags anyway, right? So image. Title would go here. Title. And description would obviously go here. Oh, local versus live. Not bad, right? So if I send another one, all these NFL
Picture
players.
of it to the side, but that is cool.
Yeah, we can take care of that. Let's fix that right now. I mean, I thought it actually kind of looks cool with that background, like sort of.
Richard Sherman's face.
Yeah. All right, so the image evidently is 438 pixels. So let's go ahead and constrain that size to 438. There it is. Title, description. I didn't get the URL, but whatever. Now if I go to my phone again and post another article, it's getting harder and harder to find articles that are
Clean.
yes. Yeah.
PC.
Right. This is increasingly getting difficult. All right, so now I'm about to post another article. Okay, so oh, my phone is all of a sudden not working. Oh, no, it went through. Okay. There it is. That's the article I just posted. So from text message to Twilio to Turbo, scrape the HTML back to here. And now we can use this as a newsfeed. So now I can just tell my friends, guys, just post all your crap onto here, and I'll just read it whenever I get around to it. Make sense?
Yeah.
And last but not least, like I was saying before, doesn't work unless it's on live, right? So let me deploy this guy. And we're going to do one more test on live and then call it a wrap. And this code will be on the tutorial section. I've been recording the video. It'll all be there.
So what we created allows you to send a text to a number and then get that information onto a web page that we created.
Yep.
What if you wanted to, from your web page, message like your friends?
Yeah, like Steve was
Would
asking that a little while
Twilio
ago.
be something that
Yeah, Twilio can do that. I'm not gonna. That's another hour demo, but it's all doable by Twilio.
Okay.
It's Twilio is very robust. So now here's a live deployment. Whatever, it'll work. Just take my word for it. It'll work. So this works live, and now we're good to go. So that's the final test. It works on a live deployment, right? And it's fast and everything. And again, this is all serverless, which means basically free, infinite scale. That's the power of serverless and why I built Turbo the way I built Turbo. So before I stop the video, any other questions or anything you want clarification on? Yeah.
So the backend has to be Node Express.
That's what Turbo is right now. What I'm trying to do, I mean, just short answer is yes. But what I'm trying to do is start building out Python and corresponding Ruby architectures. Python is underway right now.
No Java.
No, Java's not for me. So, I mean, that'll be something I hire someone to do. Like, once I get my hands on some money, I'll hire someone to do that. But what I can personally do is build corresponding Ruby and Python runtimes.
Gotcha.
So, any other questions?
But AWS Lambda supports Java.
Yeah, I just don't care.
Okay.
I think they support C# as well. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's something that I'll have to hire someone to do. Like
Yeah, I'm thinking of recommending it to my company.
AWS?
Yeah. AWS Lambda.
Well, recommend Turbo.
Well, we're Java.
Oh, Java. Okay.
Yeah, we're a Java shop. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. So.
Moving from Python to Java.
Yeah, gotcha. Any other questions? Something you want clarified? No? So again, this will be on the tutorials section of the site. I usually post around 24 hours later. It's also going to be on YouTube. That's why I record all this stuff. So I'm going to kill the video, but